This is it, Giants fans. The moment you all been waiting for. Wild Card weekend. Up next, I'll have matchups, who to watch, injury reports, predictions, and much, much more. Stay tuned. What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to this very special playoff edition, Tommy's Takes. I'm your host, Tommy G. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, turn those notifications on. Check me out on Twitter, TommyG105. Also, please check out my Giants Country team, popping out some of the best Giant content out there. And let's get right to it. What's up, Giants fans? You ready? 6 years in the making. 3 failed head coaches, 2 failed GMs, fan revolts, boat trips, black cats, primetime nightmares, devastating injuries, crippling free agent signings, quarterback sneaks, medium Pepsis, black cats, you name it. This Giants team and fan base has been through everything the last 6 seasons. And here we are, on the cusp of the first playoff game in 6 seasons, and you guys deserve it. You know, over that time span, the Giants slipped into the NFL's black hole, stumbling to a 22-59 record over that time, 5 consecutive double-digit loss seasons. Goes back even further, honestly. Giants won 2 Super Bowls in 5 years, and as quickly as they ascended is as quickly as they plummeted. But last January, John Mara says, hey, I'm going to step back. I'm going to let the football people do their thing. He did just that. Hired GM Joe Schoen to run football operations. Joe Schoen hired head coach Brian Daboll, and off they went. And that was the start, fresh start the Giants needed. Still the season looked like it was going to be a massive rebuild. Questions all through the roster. No question bigger than fourth-year pro Daniel Jones at quarterback. And I think you got some answers this season. And, Giants signal caller was mostly mediocre during his first 3 seasons in the league, being surrounded by an extremely poor supporting cast. Hard to really blame him. I think that's why his 5th-year option was declined. Not because they didn't think he could be good, but you really didn't know. Had a lot of turnovers, injuries. As what happens when you try to do too much in this league, you do have injuries. But Giants came out guns blazing. Start the season 6-2. They did hit a little bit of a rough patch, going 1-3-1. A lot of people were saying that's the real Giants. That's who they really are. But through it all, I feel like Daniel Jones has really been consistent. The numbers haven't been amazing, but he's done what he can. And with an offense that still has a bottom 5 receiving core, struggling offensive line, I think Daniel Jones has had a really good season, and so have the Giants. And it's only their second playoff berth in 10 years. And along the way, Giants had a very interesting game with the Vikings. 11-4 at the time. Giants coming off a big primetime victory against Washington that propelled their playoff chances. And Giants go to toe-to-toe with Minnesota. They lose on a 61-yard field goal. But really, that was the Giants' game to win. Shot themselves in the foot. We'll talk about it more in the show. Shot themselves in the foot several times. Block punts, drops, fumbles, interceptions, penalties. You name it, the Giants had it in that first Minnesota game. Should have easily walked away, probably even with a double-digit victory during that game. But Giants came out knowing they can go toe-to-toe with one of the best NFL teams. And here we are, the rematch. They're going to run it back. Giants, Vikings, Wild Card weekend. Giants tied into the 6th seed. Vikings are the 3 seed. The 6th seed has only lost once in the last 4 years. That bodes well for the Giants. And listen, at the end of the day, it's been a remarkable run for the Giants this season. I feel like they're playing with house money for the most part, but who cares? You're in the playoffs. Make something happen. You're getting healthy at the right time. You got Xavier McKinney back. Probably going to get Adoree Jackson back, right? You got a Landon Collins that's been playing a lot better. He's a lot further along acclimated than he was in the first Minnesota matchup. So I think things are going to be different. Obviously, I'll keep my prediction to the end of the show. But it's kind of where I'm at with how the Giants got here. Defensively, bend but don't break. Relying on the defensive line, led by 4th-year All-Pro Dexter Lawrence. He has been absolutely phenomenal. probably one of the more remarkable seasons I've seen from an interior defensive tackle. Really, him and Saquon Barkley are the two stars of this team. Barkley, another big question mark coming into the season. Can he stay healthy? What could he do? Can he get back to his rookie year? Well, high in career rushing yards, high in carries. He's only fumbled once in 295 carries, had a dozen at least highlight reel plays, runs. He's the straw that stirs this offensive drink on the Giants. Barkley is the superstar of this team. And I know the running back position has been devalued over the last, 10 years. But when it comes to Barkley, he's that special player. He keeps this offense going. He's Daniel Jones' best friend at the end of the day. He's helped Daniel Jones this season. Jones is almost at 4,000 yards total, 22 touchdowns total. They've been a dynamic duo on the ground together. But Barkley's that guy. And this duo together, Barkley and Jones, have really helped mask we'll say less than mediocre wide receiver core and a struggling offensive line, let's be honest. Even though the line has played better of late, they've struggled for the most part, especially rookie Evan Neal. We'll get to him later in the show. But at the end of the day, Giants want to pass the ball. You're going into Minnesota. First time you played Minnesota, it was a passing attack. This Minnesota pass defense struggles. And the first time Giants play Minnesota, Jones has 334 yards passing. He did have the big interception that hurt the Giants, so you want to stay away from that this time. But at the end of the day, Jones showed you that game he could do it. He could put the offense on his back. Yeah, he had one interception, but he threw the ball 42 times. And that interception was to Patrick Peterson, who made a nice break on the route by Hodgins. Those things do happen no matter who the quarterback is. And, it was a clear display that the coaching staff trust Daniel Jones. And they're going to trust him in this playoff game and during this playoff run. And Daniel Jones will be back with the New York Giants. Whether it's a 3-year deal, 4-year deal, I don't know what the parameters are. But he's earned his way back. And, you're going to have to make some decisions. You got Julian Love. It's going to be a free agent. Obviously, Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones. So you're going to have to make some decisions here. Dexter Lawrence is going to be playing on his option next year. You want to address that as well. But at the end of the day, man, this team is in the playoffs. The defense, hasn't been dominating. 13th in the NFL in sacks with 41. Dead last in interceptions with 6. And you see that on display in the first Minnesota matchup. They dropped 2 critical interceptions. That can't happen this time around, not in a playoff game. You do not want to give a team that has a better roster, a more talented roster, free chances. If they make a mistake, you have to make them pay. That's what you didn't see in that first game versus Minnesota. But also what you didn't see in that first game versus Minnesota was Xavier McKinney, Adoree Jackson. Adoree's not 100% sure to play this week, but if I had to guess, I would say Adoree's going to play this week. He had the MCL sprain. It's usually a 4 to 6 week injury. That puts him around 7 weeks when the wild card game comes around Sunday. I think he'll play. But regardless of who plays, what happens in this game, Giants cannot shoot themselves in the foot. That first Minnesota game, just being nice about it, I'll say the Giants left 10 points on the field. Really, it could have been upwards of 17 to 20 points if you want to maximize it. They had the block punt that led directly to points. You had the 2 dropped interceptions that one led to points, led to a touchdown drive. You also had the huge drop by Richie James on 3rd down. You had the fumble by Bellinger deep in Minnesota territory. So one thing you can't do is make those type of mistakes, especially when roster-wise, talent-wise, you are the inferior team. You are on the road. Have to capitalize on those key moments. The Giants plus turnover differential all year, so that was uncharacteristic of them last time they played Minnesota. Giants had 2 turnovers. Minnesota had none that game. So you look for that to balance out this time around. And listen, if Jones is going to throw 40 times again, you got to be prepared for the potential of turnovers, no matter how well he plays. That's just the way it goes. That's just football. But you got to protect that football at all costs. This is what's gotten this Giants team to the playoffs. Not turning the ball over, not being overly penalized, not making stupid plays. Now, the special teams, that's a whole different story. Special teams has plagued this Giants team all year, all season long, whether it's poor punt kick coverage, whether it's, short punts, punts that shank out of bounds. You have block punts, inconsistent punts, bad coverage. You name it, this Giants special teams has had it. Everything except for missed field goals. Thank goodness for Graham Gano. He's an ace in the hole. But listen, the playoffs margin of error is very, very thin. Especially when you go against a team that's more talented. New York could not afford to have these type of missteps Sunday. Especially, say the Giants get down early, Minnesota offense starts rolling. That makes it even more imperative to play that flawless of a game. And that didn't happen in the first game. Giants came out guns blazing, but made mistakes along the way. So I look for the Giants to play a lot cleaner game this time around. Obviously, the addition of Adoree, hopefully, and McKinney definitely will help this Giants team because, there's another problem. The second biggest reason Giants lost that first game was Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. That duo combined for 25 catches, 242 yards, and 3 touchdowns just between those two players. And Jefferson in particular is very difficult to stop, honestly. When you put him in an X wide receiver spot, he can run any route on the route tree and get open against almost any corner, except maybe Jair Alexander. We'll get to that too. You put him in the slot, and then his route running, his quickness is hard to defend. Green Bay did a great job with Jair Alexander. They did bracket a lot on Justin Jefferson, but Alexander's a great corner, and Alexander locked him down that game. I'm sure Coach Dable and Wink will be looking at some of that film from Week 18 when the Vikings when the Vikings played Green Bay. And, at the end of the day, you got to stop him. Someone like Justin Jefferson, obviously best receiver in the league. Maybe, let me rephrase that. Maybe you can't stop him. Maybe he's someone you just hope to contain. But contain is not 140 yards and a touchdown. Contain is 6 catches, 5 catches, 40 yards, 50 yards, whatever that might be. Because you also have TJ Hawkinson, who dominated the Giants in that first game. Absolutely dominated the Giants. I mean, it was ridiculous. He had 2 touchdowns. He was all over the field, catching screens, catching passes on corners, safeties. Really a remarkable tight end. Giants have also struggled against tight ends this season. It's not been pretty. And if offensively, listen, it's going to be interesting to see what Kafka does. Offensively, the way to attack this Minnesota team is through the air, right? Vikings are 22nd in QB rating allowed in the NFL. Vikings are 30th in yards per attempt given up at 7.7. So the roadmap is there. The blueprint is there. You beat this Vikings team through the air. You attack their secondary. But you also want to utilize your best player in Saquon Barkley. I'm sure the Giants would have loved if he would have had a few more touches in that first matchup versus Minnesota. He did play very well in that game, though. Honestly, he had 8 catches, 49 yards in that game. I look for a little bit more this Sunday, and this is playoffs. You get the ball in the hands of your best player. Saquon is the best player on his team. Don't let anybody fool you. He's explosive, still has his top-end speed, can make anybody miss at any time on any location of the field. So I look for the Giants to get Saquon a lot more involved this Sunday, particularly more on the ground, I would say. When it comes down to quarterback play, both quarterbacks had their way with the opposing defense in that Week 16 matchup. Cousins threw for 299, 3 touchdowns. Jones, as I alluded to earlier, had the 334 yards. Danny, if I would have one critique for Danny from that first game that I think the Giants should look at, what makes Jones unique from other quarterbacks in this league, he may not have the passing production numbers. He may not be able to, I always joke around, may not be able to throw it through his legs behind his back like a Mahomes or a Burrow. But Jones is one of the most deadly rushing quarterbacks. And he only had 4 carries that last game versus Minnesota, which was a little bit baffling because if one thing Minnesota does poorly on defense, rushing-wise, is they can't stop rushing quarterbacks. They've allowed 5.4 yards per carry to rushing quarterbacks this season. That's a major key I look to change Sunday. I think the Giants look to employ Jones on the ground a lot more. We've seen him this season getting tough first downs, breaking the pocket when things collapse, taking on defenders, shouldering defenders, doesn't run out of bounds, which I would like him to do more of. I think we all would. But that's a huge strength of Daniel Jones. And for him to have 3-4 carries in a game, you're not taking advantage of that strength. And maybe that didn't fit the game plan, but I think the game plan has to meet what the team does best. The team does best is Saquon Barkley running the ball, getting open in space, and Jones taking off when things kind of break down. He is also great with designed runs. So that's something that I look to change, honestly. He led the team on a late touchdown drive to eventually tie that game. I don't think it'll be any different Sunday. I think Jones is kind of starting to hit his streak here. I think he started to point the arrow up permanently for Daniel Jones. He's got that confidence. He's got that swagger. You've seen it in the first matchup more than ever, right? And he's been ascending probably, I say, the last 4 or 5 weeks. His arrow started to point up, and he hasn't looked back. So I look for him to have a big game Sunday versus Vikings secondary. And like I said, get it going on the ground a little. Kirk Cousins, 299, 3 touchdowns, 0 picks versus the Giants in that Week 16 game. That stings a little bit because he had 2 picks that should have easily been picked off, honestly. But he had a great game. And, Giants blitzed the crap out of him. Cousins is a good quarterback versus the blitz. No different in that matchup. He had 122.2 passer rating that day versus the Giants blitz. I think you see a little less blitz, especially with the secondary a little bit stronger. I think blitz try to counteract that poor secondary, that wounded secondary with a strong blitz, so you're not leaving a Fabian Moreau on an island. Fabian Moreau got torched in that game. So I think you see the blitzing scaled back tiny bit, not too much, because Wink is going to blitz. That's Wink Martindale's defense. I think you see it's just dialed back a little bit. Get pressure with the front 4. Giants did a good job in that game getting pressure. 4 sacks, 11 hits on Cousins. And with X and Adoree back, I think they get even more pressure. I think that front 4 could generate their own pressure. And how awesome would that be? Let Justin Jefferson run that long route he likes to run. It's not going to get there. Cousins not going to get to that drop. So that should be an interesting part to look at. Again, special teams. Giants had the block punt. They were only down 17-16 at that point. That was a critical play in that gesture. Can't happen in a playoff game. Cannot happen. Giants special teams have to be on point. Gano's going to bring it. When you look at special teams, and, it's funny when you look at it because Giants lost on a 61-yard field goal from Greg Joseph. Joseph has missed 6 field goals from 50 yards or longer this season. And he nailed that one, but, in another key situation, I hope this game doesn't come down to a field goal for the Giants, especially not a super long field goal because it's like the Giants have the worst luck in that. But he has missed 6 from 50 yards, so something to take a look at. That's the overall overview matchup. Before we get down to the actual position group breakdowns, drop your prediction, score in the comments. Tell me who you think's going to win. If you guess the score, you guess the correct team, I'm going to send you something personally. Make sure you're subscribing. Drop that now. All right, so we'll get into a couple of the position groups that I think could have a huge impact. First one's going to be the Giants offensive line versus Vikings front 7, right? Giants O-line has started to progress the last 4 weeks. They've allowed 0 sacks in 2 of the last 4 games. One of those games was the Week 18 game against the Eagles that featured backups. Even though Evan Neal started and played poorly, we'll get to that. Evan Neal has been a little bit of a mess. But one of those other games was the Minnesota game. And Giants gave up 3 sacks in that game. I counted 2 of those sacks as where Jones wasn't able to find any coverage sacks, I count 2 of those 3 sacks as coverage sacks for the Giants on the Giants that day. So I think the O-line did pretty good. Who didn't do pretty good that day was Evan Neal. And you're starting to see some massive struggles with Evan Neal, and I get it. He's a rookie. He's learning. He's trying to get himself together. Was playing well before his injury. Came back. Is not playing well. But, again, in a playoff game, you can't have that blindside sack, that strip fumble. You have Zadarius Smith out there. You can't have these guys blowing by you. And Eric, a good follower of the show, subscriber, he's like, hey, can the Giants get him some help? Can they chip a tight end? Can they put some help on his side? You're going to have to, because Evan Neal's getting wrecked out there, and it's not pretty. And, yeah, he's a rookie, but you can't let him ruin a playoff game. Danielle Hunter had his way with him. So did, like I said, Smith in the last matchup. So look for the Giants to maybe chip a little bit with Neal, maybe leave the tight end, which stinks because I want them to get Bellinger more involved in the passing game. But at the end of the day, you got to protect Neal. You cannot have a blindside sack, forced fumble in this game, which will probably be a 1-score game. You can't have that be the deciding factor. You just can't allow that. Jones was hit 11 times that game. I want to say 5 of those hits came from Neal's side, unfortunately, which was tough. And Giants offense can hit another gear when they get the pass protection, right? If the boys up front do their job. And Daboll said this week he's going to continue the rotation at left guard with Bredesen and Gates. Fine by me. I would love to see Gates at center, Bredesen at left guard permanently. But just my opinion. The offensive line has played well with the rotation, so they're going to stick to that. Biggest concern here is Neal. And straight up, pass blocking. I think Neal's done a really good job run blocking. I think the offensive line has done a really good job run blocking for Barkley for the most part, especially in that matchup versus Vikings in Week 16. He had 14 carries, 84 yards, 6.0 yards per carry, and a touchdown. And Vikings have a pretty good rush D against running backs. Not good against quarterbacks that rush the ball. But against running backs, they do a pretty good job. So, Neal, you got to get it together this game, brother. And, you know, if the Giants decide to make it more of a grinded out, chew a clock type of game, I think they have an advantage here. I think they can lean on that defensive line, rushing the ball. And I'm curious to see. I'm curious to see this Giants offensive game plan. Do they come out passing almost every play like they did last time? Do they completely switch it up and use the running the ball as the number one focus? Do they have a better balance? It's going to be super interesting, fascinating to see. This is obviously Kafka's biggest game as offensive coordinator, but extremely critical to see how he plays it. Also, Minnesota, a defensive line that likes to do a lot of stunts. So, Giants offensive line needs to be communicating, needs to be in unison together. Again, you don't want to have one of those stunts blow up for a strip sack fumble. So take a look at that. That's I would say that's probably the most important key matchup to this game. Because without the offensive line, Giants can't run the ball. DJ doesn't get protection. He can't hit his drops. He can't go through his progressions. But this is a game that I think if Neal can play better, the Giants will have the advantage in the trenches. But it's all on Evan Neal. Now, Thomas didn't play well in the first matchup versus Minnesota either, but Thomas is really the least of your worries, honestly. It's Evan Neal. If Evan Neal could buckle down, I think this Giants offense could get some really good drives together. Okay, next up, Daniel Jones versus the Vikings defense, right? Always comes down to the quarterback, doesn't it? Jones had arguably his best passing game versus the Vikings in Week 16, aside from the fourth quarter interception to Peterson that took points off the board. Hard to ask a quarterback to be perfect throwing that many times. But Jones is going to have to stay away from that critical error. And, you can't ask any player to be perfect, but when you're in the playoffs, you want to get as close to perfect as possible. And you don't want to have an interception that takes points off the board also. I think Jones did a really good job in that game, going through his progressions, reading the defense. When you look at how he kind of attacked, he went after cornerback Chandon Sullivan, who gave up 5 catches on 6 attempts, 78 yards in that game. Jones also went after Patrick Peterson a lot. Hodgins was having his way with him before that interception. I think you're going to see more of the same. I think you'll see a little bit more tight end involved in the passing game. I think they'll continue to attack Peterson. Bellinger had that big fumble. I think he was going to be involved heavily in that game plan, but he has that big fumble. All of a sudden, Giants don't start going to him. I think he'll be a big part of the passing attack this week. End of the day, listen, you got Richie James, had a big drop in Minnesota territory. That stalled the drive. You had Bellinger with a huge drop in Minnesota territory. That stalled the drive. You had Jones with the interception in Minnesota territory. That stalled the drive. This game is going to be for the taking for the Giants. It all depends how clean they play, how well they play, how smart they play. And Jones is going to be at the epicenter of that because, if he's not using his legs and he's only going to have 4 or 5 carries, he's going to have to get done with his arm. And I believe in Jones. I believe he can get it done with his arm. He's done it the last 3-4 weeks, and he's probably going to be asked to get it done this week. And listen, at the end of the day, you want that big contract. You want that $40 million a year, right? You want that 4 or 5 year deal. Go prove it in the playoffs. Put this Giants team on your back Sunday in Minnesota. Throw for 400 yards. Throw a few tutties. Get a couple of big game-breaking runs. Do it. Do what you need to do as a franchise quarterback. Because your arrow's pointed up, but it's not fully up yet. I think this is the game it happens. I think you see playoff Daniel Jones mode unlocked. Started it in that Week 16 matchup. I think you see even more now. Hodgins is playing better. James is starting to get his feet back under him after he had that multiple fumble game. I think you see playoff Daniel Jones. I think he has a big game Sunday. So when he does, make sure you come back and rewind this. Because I know if he doesn't, you'll rewind it. So, all right, next matchup. Giants defense against Minnesota's passing attack. Vikings could run the ball, but their passing attack is lethal. And they could put a game away early with their passing attack. In the Week 16 matchup, as we spoke about, Giants had no answer for Justin Jefferson, no answer for T.J. Hockenson. 25 catches, 242, 3 touchdowns between those two players. Just ridiculous numbers. Cousins enjoyed a lot of success for his Fabian Moreau. Moreau allowed 84 yards on 142.1 QB rating. That's why it's so imperative for Adoree to get back this game. You do not want Moreau out there again on Justin Jefferson. You really don't. Landon Collins being more up to speed, I think, helps, especially covering Hockenson. I think you'll see Landon kind of shadowing him, following and tailing him wherever he goes. Obviously, Landon was a safety, still has good coverage skills. I think that's going to play a vital factor. But it's Adoree. He's still questionable. He came out and said, I'm not sure if I'm going to play. I want to be 100%. McKinney comes out and says Adoree's playing. It's great to have him back. Probably a little bit of a smokescreen. I could not see any situation where Adoree doesn't play in this playoff game. I would be shocked, honestly. And if they play, they should be able to limit that damage. Hopefully you force Minnesota to run the ball a little bit more. Obviously, the Giants don't have a great rushing defense, which is going to hurt. But I think in this game, if you're going to pick your poison, you'd rather have Minnesota run the ball. You'd rather get them to a point where the pass is not working. They're trying to balance things out. Because if that's the case, then you're doing it right. Giants couldn't even get to stop the run versus Minnesota in Week 16. Because Minnesota came out and said, we're going to pass against you until you stop it. And the Giants couldn't stop it. So Minnesota only ran the ball sparingly. And I think if Minnesota focuses on the run more this game, even though the Giants' run D is not that good, ranked in the bottom 5 in the NFL, I think that plays into New York's hands a little bit. Because you want to have this Vikings offense on the field as little as possible. You want to limit possessions for them. And if they're running the ball and they're in their own heads with their offensive game plan, I think that would work. And also, listen, if you can cover Hockenson and you can cover Jefferson, you also have Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne, who have played well for this team. I look for the Giants to run a lot of cover 6 Sunday. Giants are starting to fall in love with this cover 6. They want their DBs on the field. Can't blame them. This is probably one of the worst linebacking cores in the NFL. I wouldn't want these linebackers on the field either. I'm not going to lie. I'll take 4 or 5 corners on the field instead of linebackers any day. So those are our matchups. And we're going to recap it now. Listen, I'm just going to be honest here. Giants are in a rebuild season. They're playing with house money. Throw that out the window, though. This is an amazing opportunity to gain some positive playoff experience for players like Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Dexter Lawrence. You go into Minnesota against a good team, and you go in there and you kick some ass, and you get that playoff experience. And you say, you know what? Take that house money. We don't need it. Forget that Giants shouldn't be here. Just be happy with the playoffs. They should be happy they got there. Forget that. That's nonsense. Minnesota's not going out there and laying down on Sunday. Minnesota's coming for blood. They're coming to hurt. They're coming to beat these Giants and stomp them out. You go out there and you represent. You represent for this team. You represent for the city of New York. And a win Sunday is a major boost to this rebuild. And that's what everybody has to think of. It's not the Giants are lucky they made it here. They're in the playoffs. Everybody should be happy. No, this is the next building block. Imagine if you can go into next season and say, you know what? Not only did this Giants team make the playoffs, this Giants team went into a feisty Minnesota crowd against a good Minnesota team, and they got a playoff victory. Just mentally, emotionally, psychologically for these players, that would be such a huge boost. And who knows what happens? You get hot in the playoffs. We've seen with the 2007 Giants, even though that team was more talented roster-wise, you've seen they got hot at the right time. That was a sloppy team for the most part in 2007. But they got hot at the right time, they got healthy at the right time, and they won the championship. You know why? Because they didn't know any better. They didn't know they weren't supposed to be there. All they knew was beat that opponent across from us. And that's what this 2022 Giants team needs to do. Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, Dexter Lawrence, go out there Sunday, take care of business, play clean football, smart football, don't turn the ball over. Daniel Jones, show that you're the quarterback of the future of the franchise. Show that you're worth that big deal. Saquon Barkley, do what you've been doing all year. You've been a superstar. Dexter Lawrence, do what you've been doing all year. You've been a superstar. And if the Giants go in there, play clean football, smart, sound football, they'll win this game. They'll score 28 points. Minnesota will score 21, and the Giants will be moving on in the playoffs. That's my prediction. That's it for today's show. Again, thank you, everybody, for joining me on this very, very special playoff edition of Tommy's Takes. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, we'll be back Sunday with a victory recap. Please subscribe, drop some comments. Love interacting with you guys and girls. Also, drop your score predictions in those comments. And that's it. Playoff football. Let's get it. Peace.